it is a very rare situation where a medical provider will say your child has this terrible situation because I made a mistake.
If you have a loved one suffering from cerebral palsy, do you know what to do? Do you know if you have a legal case? That's what we're going to ask the lawyer on this episode. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com, and my guest is attorney Lyle Warshauer with the Warshauer Law Group in Atlanta. Lyle, thank you for making some time to answer our questions today.
My pleasure.
Let's start with a little bit of a definition. What is cerebral palsy?
Well, cerebral palsy is actually a group of disorders that affect movement and muscle tone, as well as cognitive function, that is the result of damage to a fetus or a child's brain. CP is really sort of a constellation of symptoms and disabilities. It can vary widely in terms of the level of disability associated with it, both in the physical component and the cognitive. To kind of dive a little bit deeper, there's sort of two aspects of it. Again, the movement and coordination problems, and then the cognitive. So oftentimes there are variations in the muscle tone where a baby is either very stiff or very floppy. So if you have a stiff muscle tone, that might result in exaggerated reflexes or spasticity, or that stiff tone with normal reflexes might make a child very rigid. So then you will have difficulty with gait problems, but it can go much deeper than that. It can be physical problems that would be associated with difficulty swallowing, and all of the attendant problems that are associated with that. There can be excessive drooling. Obviously, the brain damage, what we'll see often is kids that are born having seizures. Those can continue, or they can be only in the early times. But as a result of all of these things, the kids can have learning disabilities, not reach milestones at appropriate levels. There are also associated issues depending on where the brain damage is, where a child might have hearing problems, speech problems, even visual problems, all associated with that damage to the brain.
And do we know what some causes are of CP?
Well, it's caused by an abnormality or a disturbance in the brain of the child. That can happen prior to, it can be the result, for example, of a genetic problem, or it can be the result of something that actually physically happens to that child's brain. So there are a number of ways that can happen. Again, there can be some gene mutation, or it can be something that happens in the mom when the baby is developing. So for example, an infection. It could be a bacterial infection or a viral infection. It can be an infection that the baby has at the time of delivery or shortly thereafter, again, bacterial or viral, so something like meningitis or cytomegalovirus. It can happen from trauma during the birth process, or just in the kind of trauma, any head trauma that can happen. And then one of the things that we see a lot of when it's related to the actual labor and delivery process is a lack of oxygen, which would then lead to ischemia in the brain and then long-term consequences from that.
So it could be, as we like to say, it could be a bad outcome, or it could be the cause of medical malpractice, correct?
That's correct.
And
And
how do you determine the difference?
Well, I think it's important to say that just because a child has cerebral palsy, it does not mean that there was medical negligence, but there are certain circumstances where the medical care actually does, or the lack of proper care does lead to the diagnosis of cerebral palsy. And there are a variety of ways that can happen. So as I mentioned earlier, some of these injuries occur way back, or there's a reason to believe that they may occur as a result of some conditions that are happening with mom in the pregnancy. If those aren't recognized and managed properly during the pregnancy, it exposes the child to risk of injury. Certainly if there's an infectious process and that is not treated, either during the pregnancy or during the delivery process, that infection can be transmitted to the baby and the baby can be injured as a result. Sometimes a baby has an infection that is just not recognized after delivery, and so the baby is not treated at that point in time. Labor and delivery is a difficult process. One of the things that we'll often see is that there's a decision to do a vaginal delivery where it's really not appropriate and the baby should be delivered by cesarean. Or during the delivery process, there is distress in mom or distress in baby, and that's not recognized and responded to, maybe by converting to a cesarean. So there are a myriad of ways that medical care, which does not meet accepted standards, could result in injury to the child.
It sounds, from what I can tell so far, very complicated and not the sort of thing that a parent should be able to even expect to be able to figure out on their own. So it would seem like very important to get somebody with experience in dealing with these things to help them navigate these waters, correct?
That is true. I think birth injury claims are among the most difficult, even within the medical malpractice arena. They're very complex. There are so many specialties involved. So it's really important to get the medical record and review that carefully to find out what happened. Again, simply a bad outcome does not mean negligence, but it's really important to look at the entire process, sometimes going back to prior pregnancies, other conditions that are going on in mom, and looking at everything all the way through. So it not only involves looking at that record and having someone who understands obstetrical issues and obstetrical claims, but to consult with the folks that do that. So talking to experts and determining what standards apply and whether those standards were met. That's really something that takes a lot of work and a lot of evaluation.
What if parents think, well, the doctor or the hospital would tell me if something had gone wrong that shouldn't have gone wrong? Are they obligated to tell them that? What's your answer there?
Yes and no. Certainly, a medical provider is obligated to explain any complications that occurred with medical care, with a labor and delivery. And certainly, medical providers need to explain to a patient or to parents of a child that has been injured the nature and extent of the problems that the child is having. But it is a very rare situation where a medical provider will say, your child has this terrible situation because I made a mistake. That just doesn't happen very often, and that is not wrong, but it does require evaluation and investigation to determine if in fact that occurred.
As we've determined, Lyle, it's very complicated. I'm sure it takes a lot of investigation, a lot of experts involved. What if parents are thinking, I can't afford this to pursue this legal action? What do you say then?
Well, I think very few ordinary people of any means can really tackle these cases alone. They are extremely expensive. I do medical negligence cases of all types. Birth injury cases are certainly the most expensive types of cases that we handle. And the main reason for that is that there are so many different people involved in the treatment protocols that we have to retain a lot of different experts. And people that handle this kind of work, that do these kinds of cases, we're used to that and we expect that. And we take on that responsibility to retain those people. We do not expect our clients to have the means to do that at the front end. So we talk to obstetricians and maternal fetal medicine specialists and pediatric neuroradiologists and placental pathologists and life care planners and all of the myriad of medical providers that are going to talk about standard of care, causation, and how to make these kids' lives as productive as they can be given their disabilities.
And you handle these cases on a contingency basis?
We do. We always do that. So we take the responsibility of fronting the expenses, and our clients are not responsible for those unless we are successful in getting a recovery for them.
Lyle, thank you so much for answering our questions today and helping us out with all this information. I appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
That's going to do it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been attorney Lyle Warshauer of Atlanta. If you want the best information or you're ready to choose a lawyer that lawyers choose, make sure to go to askthelawyer.com. Also, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe by clicking below. Thank you for watching. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com.